once again. Thank you all for joining us. This is Nuance, and we'll be speaking about local media and whether we think they're too political or not political enough. Of course, I'm Mike Scala, joined as always by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist in the chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on, Jay?
Chilling, man. Just chilling. Same old, same old. Nothing new. I was trying to remember something, but it slipped my mind and it's just gone. I have no clue what it is now.
Speaking of gone, hopefully the bad weather here in New York is gone, although I'm hearing it's going to start raining again at some point. It's been beautiful the past 2 days, 75 degrees today. Can you believe it?
Mm. Yeah, like here too. Like it was the last couple days, it was really good. And then yesterday it was just started raining and the wind was heavy. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I do have cause to celebrate and enjoy the nice weather because officially today I can say that all of my clients have made the ballot safely. And so it's another successful year of election law practice. Always grateful for that.
All right. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yes, yes. It's funny. We'll get into it. I was actually out in Asbury Park this past week, and I picked up this local paper, and that's what was the genesis of the topic for tonight about whether we think it's too political or not political enough. Because I read some interesting things in this paper, and I was comparing it to our local papers here in Queens. So we'll get into that. But
Hmm.
before we do, I actually saw this on the New York Times earlier. I thought maybe we could quiz ourselves. It's always good to sharpen the swords
Uh-oh.
speaking. I don't know how well we're going to do. It's a history quiz, apparently. I'm usually pretty good with history, but I'm better at US history about presidential elections, things like that. I don't know what this is going to be about. It says, can you place 8 notable events in chronological order? So you want to give it a shot? We'll see.
Okay, let's do it.
All right.
Let's do
Start
it.
the quiz. Let's see.
Eight chronological events.
Yeah.
Eight events in chronological order. Okay, got it. Let's see. Let's see what we got.
Okay. Oh, wow. I don't know. This is already looking kind of obscure here, Jay.
Uh-oh.
All right. So 1817, it says. I guess they can give
Oh,
us this one.
we already got the we already got the date.
No, yeah, this is the first one. We have to decide if the event is now going to be before or after this that they're going to give us.
Okay,
They're
okay.
giving us
Well,
the first one. In 1817, a German builds a forerunner to the bicycle. It takes 50 more years before someone adds the pedals. Okay, that's 1817. Now,
right.
here's the clue we have to compare that to. Hypatia, perhaps the leading mathematician of her era, becomes a popular speaker in Alexandria, drawing eager crowds from abroad. Is
That
that
was before.
that was
Way
before,
before.
right? Way before. That's what I thought. Before
Yeah.
1980.
Alexandria,
Egypt.
Egypt. Yeah, way before. I think it's Hypatia or something like that.
Hypatia? Yeah.
Yeah, way before.
Okay. We're gonna place it there.
Yeah.
Correct. All right. So far we're doing good. All right. Next one. The okay. Oh, by the way, that was circa 400. So yes, way before
Yeah,
1870.
yeah.
All right. The maybe that was a gimme. Let's see if it gets harder. The provincial government of Alberta, Canada, reports its first rat. Alberta takes quick action, keeping it one of the few rat-free places in the world. I'm going to say that's way after 400. The question is it after 1817? It has to be, right?
I would guess, yeah, because was it even a country in
Right.
1817?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, we were a country in 1776. Was
Yeah.
Canada a country yet?
And didn't have a provincial government, but they're saying Alberta, Canada. I'm going to say this is after. I'm going
Let's
with,
go after. Let's go
yeah,
after. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
we could be way off, but I think this is right. We are correct. 1950 on that one.
yeah.
All right. So far, so good. We're up 3 of 8. All right. Let's see this. Okay. Well, this one we're probably going to get. I'm hope. Well, could be. All right. Let's see. After a Maryland student floats an old fashioned idea, two politicians debating issues, the U.S. holds its first televised presidential debate. I think I know when this is.
Televised. That's definitely after.
I believe this would be Nixon and Kennedy, right? So this would be 1960. So I'm going to say after. But it could be a trick question, right? It could be, for all we know, there could have been a test debate that happened in the 1950s somewhere.
Yeah, but we're comparing this to 1817,
No, no,
right?
no. We have to figure out now the chronological
Oh,
order of all these events. We've got a 1950 event here already.
yeah, yeah. Let's go after because televised. I mean, I don't think they were doing the debates like that on TV
I
before.
believe 1960 was first, at least major one. So I'm going to go with after 1950. So that's the newest event on our timeline here.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go with that. We are correct. Nice. I'm getting them all so far. And we're halfway done.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
Right. All right, let's check this out. A day after Apollo 13 lifts off, okay, the astronaut Jack
69.
Swigert realizes he forgot to file his taxes. He later gets an extension for being out of the country. Not just out of the country, right? He's out of the planet.
That was 669.
So we're saying, yeah. So again, the newest one, right?
Yeah.
That was correct. 1970, actually,
Okay.
on that one. But yes, 69 was the moon landing, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Somewhere, I think so.
All right.
Moon landing, I think also MLK assassination,
No, that was 68.
68, right.
Yeah. MLK
There's a lot that happened in those
assassinated.
couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah. Nixon becoming president, right?
Yeah.
Elected. Yeah, 68. Yeah, very eventful year. All right. Oh, you might know. This could be up your alley. You might know this one. It's about
Uh-oh.
Hawaii. Rarely visited by foreign leaders, the U.S. eagerly hosts its first state dinner for a sovereign. The guest is David Kalukua, the king of Hawaii.
Kahanamoku?
I'm sorry?
Spell it?
Kalakua. Kalakaua.
Yeah, Kalakaua.
All right. Now, it says the king of Hawaii, the sovereign. So this has to be before Hawaii became a state, right?
Yep.
Okay. So
It became a state in, I believe it was either 58 or 54. So the sovereigns probably would have been in the earlier 1900s.
so it would be before 1950,
Yes.
but after 1817, we think.
Yeah, I think so.
So you want to do that one between 1817 and 1950?
Yeah.
Wow, here we go. Let's try it. We are correct. 1874. Wow.
Yeah.
We've got them all so far. I like this. Let's see if we get the last three.
Uh-oh.
Have a
This is gonna
perfect
get
run.
rough.
Yeah, it's going to get rough. Hopefully, I mean, should say too bad we're not going to win anything, right? There should be a prize at the end of this.
Yeah, right?
Look, we're on a game show right now. All right, let's see. An astronomer, Henrietta Leavitt, finds a way to measure distance between far off stars. It will show that there are many galaxies in a vast universe. When was that?
For some reason, as soon as you started speaking, 1984 popped into my head. I don't know why. And I
Really?
have no clue why. Far off galaxies. What's the most recent date we've got? 1970?
Yes.
I want to say after 1970,
She finds a way to measure distance between far off stars. It will show that
but
there are, but so when did we learn, I guess, there are many galaxies in the universe? Was that recently?
no, no.
So maybe this was earlier. And by the way, I'll say they may be doing this to throw me off, but the picture that they're using of her is in black and white. Was that I don't know if that's a trick though.
Mm. I mean, we tend to think like, you go back into the 50s or the 40s or the 30s that they weren't that advanced, but we got to remember like it was it 60, 69 when they landed on the moon, and we haven't even done it since. Like,
Right.
they
I'm
still knew
thinking
their
it's
stuff.
yeah. I don't know. My gut tells me it isn't the most recent one here.
Okay. Um,
Is it in the 50s or before? Or after? Could be after the 60s also. Between 60 and 70. It could be in the 60s or the 50s or prior. Maybe it's in the 50s.
well,
I mean,
they were doing a
yeah,
lot of
Kennedy was talking about the space program, right?
right.
We were big into that back then.
Yeah, the 60s they were heavy into that because they were competing with Russia,
Right,
trying
right,
to be the first.
right. So maybe this is in the 50s.
50s or 60s would be probably a good guess, I suppose. Um,
But of course,
yeah.
it could be before 1950 as well.
Well, this is say that it was an astronomer. Oh, see, I'm thinking like not electron microscopes. I'm thinking about these big powerful telescopes. I'm thinking Hubble era. That's why I was thinking later
Right.
when we start to really see far off galaxies and things like that.
But
That's
it
why I
doesn't
was
say that she
thinking later.
invented a device. It said she finds a way to measure distance. So it could be any number of things, right? There could be mathematical equations involved in this.
Yeah.
It doesn't
I would think I would go with the 70s.
really. Okay. So
That's
you,
what I would think.
okay.
But if it's a black and white picture,
There's a black and white picture.
then 70s is not a good thought.
Right. I'm thinking more like the 50s.
All right, let's do 50s. Let's do 50s.
No, we just missed it by one. 1912.
1912.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we had 1874 as our last date. So if we would have gone before 1950, we would have got it.
Oh, okay, okay. We missed our first one.
All right. The Nok people of West Africa start to make terracotta figures and create tools with iron. That's got to be a long time ago, right?
Yeah. That's before the mathematician.
Before 400.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep, about 500 BC.
Yeah.
Okay. Last one. To focus people on archery practice, Scotland imposes its first ban on the distracting homegrown sport of golf. It doesn't work. So when does Scotland ban this annoying new sport called golf?
I I would say, hmm, that's before 1817.
Hmm. Trying to think which presidents were into golf. Yeah, it definitely started in the 1800s, right?
But to focus on archery, like we weren't,
Right.
when was archery something that people were focused on like that?
You think before 1817? I'm doubting that. There's a big window here between 1817 and 1874 that we have.
Okay.
But then again, there's an even bigger window between 400 and 1817.
So maybe between the 1817 and 1874?
Want to try that? That's about where I would put it. Then again, for all we know, golf could have started in the 1700s, right? In Scotland.
Yeah, yeah.
You want to try before 1817? It's up to you. I'm just thinking we have a bigger chance. There are more years between 400 and 1817 than there are between 1817 and 1874.
Yeah.
Your call.
Let's go with the between 1817 and 1874.
All right. Nope. 1457. Wow.
Ah,
We were way off.
yeah, should have gone with the first thought.
Yeah. So we scored a 21 out of 28 points with 6 of 8 events correct on a flashback. Okay.
That's pretty good though. I think we did
Pretty
really
good
well.
considering I think most people would have to take a guess at least some of these, right? I mean, who knows all these that well?
Yeah. Yeah, I knew golf had been around for a while, but
I
yeah,
didn't
I think
know it
that
was
was
around that long because I'm associating with country clubs and that kind of thing. But I guess that's the
right.
sport. It was around for a very long time. But since the 1400s, they said,
Yeah.
wow.
It's pretty crazy to think about, right? Like the 1400s, because um, especially coming from the United States when, the country wasn't even around then. And I remember having that same sort of realization when I was in Copenhagen. And I think we were on like a little ferry and it was just going through the canals around the city. And we're looking at the Capitol buildings and all these buildings and like, yeah, but friends like, oh yeah, that building's been there since, 14 something or 15. And like, I was like, yeah, all these buildings are older than my country and they're still being used, right? It's
Right,
like
right.
it's so
And you
like the
don't
whole
find buildings
civilization.
Yeah, you don't find buildings that old here in the US.
There was no US then, you know what I mean? Like,
Even before,
so,
right, but I'm saying even before there was a US, you don't even find any buildings on this land that are that old.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was kind of funny. So like you're thinking about people playing golf on, however they were playing golf back then before like anything in the US existed in the
Mhm.
way it is now.
Yeah, yeah.
So I have that same sort of kind of funny realization about things in different parts of the world, especially when talking about Japan, because Japan has the longest continuously running businesses in the world.
Mm,
Like the oldest continuously running business in the world is actually a family owned kind of a traditional hotel and hot spring, and that's been running since the year 768.
wow. Okay. I
So
thought I
non
saw that the oldest running restaurant in the world was in Spain, but it could be mistaken.
I don't know. I haven't heard about that one. I know like in that top 50 or whatever, majority of them are in Japan. And actually, previously, the longest running business was a construction company that had been around since in Japan since like the year 514 or something like that, and only recently got sold to a bigger construction company. So they kind of exist, but they don't exist independently.
Right.
But just to think like the year like 748 or 760 or whatever, all that's happened since then. There was no US. There was, I think the Mayans and the were still around then, and we don't even, or Aztecs, and we don't even know what happened to them. Somebody was over here like, serving running a hotel and stuff. It's just like really, really crazy.
Yeah, yeah. To have that kind of perspective. It also reminds us how places like the US are so new, and
Right.
that's why, or at least it helps explain why we find ourselves in some of the situations we find ourselves in, right? We say, well, why can't we do it like other countries do it? Well, maybe they've been
Right.
around for centuries longer, and we're still trying to find our footing as a country.
Yeah, yeah. We're probably in the grand scheme of things, we're probably in the teenager phase or maybe a little bit older in the
Mm-hmm.
20s at
Mm-hmm.
this point. Yeah, we're still babies.
Yeah, I mean, compared to most countries in the world, certainly we're very young, right?
Yeah, yeah. So,
It's crazy. Golf in Scotland in the 1400s. Yeah, it's, Chris Columbus
right?
didn't sail the ocean blue yet, as
Yeah, right?
the legend went. So, all right. Well, speaking of legendary, I have to say this. I was on the boardwalk in Asbury Park this past weekend for the first time. Nice boardwalk. The area kind of reminded me of Long Beach here in Long Island, but
Hmm.
there was a retro arcade. I didn't go in, but walking by, I saw this retro arcade, and they had a speaker that was playing music, I guess, from the arcade out onto the boardwalk, maybe to entice you to come in or whatever. But the song that was playing was B-Boy Document by the High and the Mighty, featuring Most Def and Mad Skills. And
Dope. Dope.
yeah, that sung to my heart. I'm here in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and here's this what 99 2000 raucous track playing on the boardwalk. So it definitely made me feel good. I actually want to investigate now and see who the owners are. And I don't even know, to tell you the truth. Is there a jukebox in there? Is it someone in there playing that? Do the owners play that? Do they have like an underground hip hop playlist that they rock? I don't know, but I'm really curious about this place now, and I want to support that business because of that one song I heard playing. But one thing that I did come across and I picked up is a copy of this, the Tri-City News, it's called. And this is in a county called Monmouth County in New Jersey. And I guess the Tri-Cities would be Asbury Park, Red Bank, and Long Branch in New Jersey. But I wanted to read their local paper to compare and contrast it to our local papers in Queens. Because if you read, for example, The Wave in Rockaway, it focuses on Rockaway issues, but it doesn't come off as overtly political in its coverage. Now, some will say that sometimes it has too much of a conservative bend or whatever based on some of the things that they're saying, but it's mostly in terms of how they'll cover a local issue. For example, there's controversy over proposed development happening in Rockaway, and the paper comes off like they're against it, but really what they're doing is they're reporting that most people are vocally against it in the area. So in that way, it's a reflection of the environment that it's in. It tends not to get too political, in my opinion, at least not overtly. This one, by contrast, is all about politics. It really surprised me because I was expecting more coverage just on local happenings and in a way that's at least superficially neutral. This doesn't seem to be, right? On the cover, Asbury's political future shifts to Quinn. Deputy mayor runs for re-election. But if you read the article, it talks about how they've supported this woman, Amy Quinn, who I guess is the deputy mayor of Asbury Park, and how she controls the city council. She could be mayor if she wants. And it even uses some language that you might consider unbecoming of a newspaper. I don't know. I thought it was funny. It says, sometimes she's been pissed off, but shit happens. It just writes that in the paper. Kind of funny. But then you have here another article, Monmouth Democrats, Infusion of Young Leadership. Davis could be first Black female county chair in New Jersey. They talk about the leadership in Asbury Park. And they mentioned that Quinn, I guess, is part of the LGBTQ community. And then there are people of color that she's running with. They talk about that as being something that they're supportive of. Then you have, let's see, a story here about how Monmouth County Democrats were instrumental in the governor's wife not getting the nomination for U.S. Senate. So there's a big story on that. There's actually a counter, as I flip through this, there's a counterpoint here, a column called Justified Right, the conservative alternative to Tri-City. And so they're talking all about the ills of the Biden administration and the Orwellian, quote unquote, Orwellian government lockdowns during COVID. Joe Biden's ghost flights from the border to sanctuaries. I mean, this guy really seems like he's drinking the juice, right?
This is a local paper?
A local paper. That's what I'm saying. You don't usually see that.
You sure it's not like a local tabloid?
Right. And so, and of course, this guy's name is Kulari. He's got to be an Italian. Again, he's Italian Americans making us look bad. I don't like that. Under the Biden administration, the cost of grocery items like eggs has risen some 40%. And then this part is funny here. He goes, one of my good friends recently confided in me that the older she gets, the more disillusioned and conservative she gets. She's a typical New York liberal under 30, quote unquote, spiritual, but not religious. He's making fun of that. So, see, he's got to have this justified right, as he calls it, a conservative alternative to Tri-City, Tri-City being the name of the newspaper. So he feels that the newspaper is so politically left that he has to come in with his conservative column to counteract that. But then you turn the page, and there's a column called Rainbow Room, Commentary and Culture from the LGBTQ Community. And the headline here is, This is Gay? And it goes into this. So
is it just like is that anti-LGBT or pro-LGBT?
It's pro. And I have to say that from
what it just seems like a very a publication of all kinds of views, even extreme or not.
Well,
just seems
it's from what I'm seeing here, it's very progressive, but they at least allow the conservative guy to have his page in there to show that they can be fair and balanced and give him his viewpoint as well. But that's one page out of the whole paper. I mean, you go to the next page here, after the Rainbow Room, Unsilenced, Voices for Justice and Equity. It goes on and on. What I'm not seeing is a whole lot of coverage on local issues. Now, it does use the local events as a backdrop for the political commentary, but it almost seems secondary, right? It seems like the political agenda is at the forefront, and they're saying this is our political agenda here in Asbury Park, right? As opposed to this is what's happening in Asbury Park, and by the way, there are political things going on too, right? It seems like they're really keyed into the politics and everything. I'm curious as to what people think, because we get heat sometimes here locally for our papers allegedly being too political, but it certainly pales in comparison to this. I think our papers look quaint in that regard next to this. And so I'm wondering what people think. Where is the appropriate line? You know what I mean? Should the politics be removed entirely from it? But that seems maybe idealistic, but also perhaps unrealistic, because the papers have to report on what's happening locally, and certainly politics are happening locally. We say all politics is local. And so maybe you don't remove all the political reporting, but do you get this overt? you know. Now I just flipped as we were speaking. I'm on page 30. This actually is pretty cool. Councilman gets his Red Bank record riot. And in fact, you see a councilman there holding vinyl records. So there's an event apparently he's bringing to Red Bank. He said it's like having 15 or 20 record stores in one place. They're going to have, I think it said 75 vendors of vinyl records out in the street where you can just walk up and down the street and buy them, kind of like a flea market in Red Bank for vinyl records. So that's pretty cool. And from what I've seen so far, this is the first story. You got to get to page 30 in this paper to find the first actual story of a purely local event that isn't hyper focused on politics.
Is that like maybe it's just like an independent publication or something like that, not like the major news publication?
You know what? I don't know the area well enough to say, but I'll say this. This was the only publication I saw that was out there. That's why I grabbed it. If there were multiple papers, I would have taken them all and compared and contrasted. But I was out on the boardwalk. This was the paper that I saw. So it's possible. Maybe there are others, but maybe not. I mean, the fact that this conservative columnist felt the need to put his paper, his column in this paper suggests that maybe this is the main publication. That's why he thinks that he has to have his opposing viewpoint. I don't know. But I did find it striking. I'm not used to this, and I don't know whether it's a good thing or not. But the Wave, the Forum News Group, the Queen's Chronicle, sure they cover local politics, but they at least come off. They make it seem like they're focusing on what's happening locally and just inserting the political news with all the other news as opposed to making politics the news, right? So what do we think?
I think when we think about news, we expect that it's more just the coverage of events, what's happening without any sort of opinion or slant. It's supposed to be just an informative view of what's going on around you. With this rise of cable news where they have more commentary type of news programs, that's kind of sounds like what that kind of thing is, like a whole editorial publication right there.
Right. But it does also seem to be holding itself out as the local paper, and it does have coverage, like we said. You have to get to page 30 to find it in this one, but it also does cover local happenings. I mean, people are picking it up, assuming to find out what's happening where they live, where they are, not only to read about their political viewpoints. So is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Should local media stay away from that? Or should it just be they can do what they want and you as a consumer free to read it or not read it? You can consume whatever media that you wish.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's a newspaper, then I think there's certain journalistic standards that we expect. But I mean, at what point does it just, how far does that extend into, just any sort of public discourse publication, anything that you just want to print on anything.
Right. And also what makes it a newspaper? Is it how it presents itself? Should it say this is a publication about politics? Because it says Tri-City News, Monmouth's News and Arts Weekly. That's how it describes itself, news and arts. So it doesn't say a political editorial paper.
Right.
It does present itself as a newspaper.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Have you had experience? I know, I've had this conversation with people saying that people don't read local papers anymore or any papers or whatever, but especially not local papers. I think it depends on where you are. In Rockaway, I know a lot of people still do read those local papers. Shout out to the Wave, shout out to the Rockaway Times, shout out to the Rockaway Point News, right, in Breezy Point, because Rockaway is a very unique place, and there are many local events and issues going on that you're not going to get from a New York wide or national, big time paper or on TV or whatever. So they do turn to these local papers to figure out and stay informed about what's going on locally. Other places aren't quite the same. You know what I mean? Even here in Howard Beach, we do have local papers, but people aren't reading. I can tell you that people are not reading them as much as they will in a place like Rockaway. They're more likely to get their news from larger sources, broader sources, like whether it's the Post or the New York Times or cable news or what have you. So it certainly makes a difference when you're talking to voters, right? When you go knock on doors in Rockaway, people are focused on what's happening with the beach and the jetty,
Right.
and maybe local
Right.
development and all that kind of stuff. You know, you're in Howard Beach, they're talking about Biden and Trump. They're not talking about anything local. And so it makes a big difference. And even in how they're voting, right? In a place like Rockaway, they'll vote on local issues. A place like Howard Beach, much more likely to vote on national issues, straight down ticket, right? So I wonder to what extent these papers shape that narrative. You know, and it's also, as I said, a function, I think, of the area and what the needs and the circumstances of that area are. So from what I'm gathering, Asbury Park in that area may be kind of similar in that it's its own unique community with its own identity to a certain degree. And so maybe people are more in tune with local media. I don't know. But I still think we have to ask the question as to what is the local media's responsibility, and should they be presenting themselves more neutrally, or should they dive headfirst into the politics?
Hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Again, I think that's gonna come along the lines of, qualifies as a newspaper? How do we separate some of these things?
Well, so
And
do
I
they
think
have
we've
the
seen that,
responsibility of separating themselves? I mean, should there be a
right.
distinction on there?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that blur in line with the rise of cable news, right? That was kind of
Sure.
the big difference that kind of, or the big thing that changed the landscape. Like before that, it was all factual based. It was the Ted Koppels. It was like this is what's going on. And then cable news popped up and they had to fill a 24-hour schedule. And so like now you got all these kind of commentary shows and opinion pieces and all this type of things. And so it becomes like news entertainment, and like Fox News is not really news. It's got the news moniker, but it's more people just discussing things. I think MSNBC is pretty similar on the other end, but
Should
yeah.
should these outlets not be allowed to label themselves as news? Should there be some regulation on that, or is it really just up to the public to figure out what's what and respond accordingly?
You'd hope that the public would be able to discern it, but we're seeing that that's not the case.
Yeah,
Um,
it seems like people
they shouldn't
want
be able to
news
present
that aligns
themselves.
with their pre-existing views. Um, if it's something that they believe, if it fits their narrative, their worldview, then they're
Right,
likely to see it as news, right? Because it reaffirms what they already believe about the world. And
right,
if it challenges their viewpoint, they're more likely to say, well, that's not news, that's fake news, or they shouldn't be called news or whatever, right? So it depends on what their subjective perspective is.
right. I think for news, we should probably have something that's, labeled as such, because we often say that the cornerstone of a democracy is a free press, and people can do these, we are able to be who we are because we're informed.
Mm-hmm.
So if we start blurring that lines of what's uh news to inform, then maybe we're going to start losing our way, and that could be where we're at right now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, Fox News can exist but can't call themselves news, maybe call themselves something else. You have to be lit, you have to adhere to certain journalistic regulations if you're going to consider yourself news.
Right. Then you also have First Amendment concerns as well, right? Trying to regulate the kind of speech that people can make. But as we know, it's not unlimited. So there could be certain areas, especially if they're defrauding the public in some way. But
Right.
let's put this out to the people. And when people comment on this, hopefully they can say where they are located to give us a better idea. Because I want to ask about their own local media. Of course, if you're here in Queens, you'll be talking about Queens Chronicle or the Wave or the Rockaway Times, et cetera, on the Rockaways, maybe the Forum News Group in Howard Beach and so forth. But we're going to put this out broadly, and so we'll get responses outside of New York even. I want to know where people are located because there is controversy or discussion at least about whether local media even matters, if people are even reading these papers. Sometimes, the local publication will be tossed on every house and end up in the garbage, and most people aren't reading it. Like I said, I think in some places they're reading it more. So let's try to get a sense of, does it even carry any weight at all in where people live, where they're at. So the poll question of the week is, do you believe your local media, including the hometown newspapers, are too political or not political enough? And
Yeah.
I'm really curious to hear. I want people to say, well, where I live, maybe say where you live. This is what it is. I'm expecting some people to say we don't even have local media or we never read it. It's, just a paper for the dog to go to the bathroom on or whatever. And some places maybe it does carry more weight. I know it carries more weight, but it'll be interesting to do a bit of a case study on that to see, okay, in the areas where local media is having an effect, what is the commonality?
Right.
I'm for
Yeah.
example, I can just guess because I know Rockaway is big on that. Maybe island communities could be right. Similar to how Rockaway is a peninsula, feels very isolated geographically. Maybe areas that are more geographically isolated have local media influencing what goes on more, and maybe they have more or a bigger responsibility in an area like that.
Yeah, could be. And who knows, maybe that's the culture of the town,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where that's just very common, it's very normal, it's not a big deal, or it's very expected, or, people are accustomed to it.
Right, right. So let's get people's thoughts on that. Speaking of thoughts, we had a poll last week too, right?
Yes, we did have a poll last week. Um, it centered around the series finale of Curb Your Enthusiasm,
Yes.
where Larry David was on trial, and it was kind of a throwback to the Seinfeld uh, ending, which Larry David also helped create. And so the question was around uh, being more accurate in legal depiction. So our question was, should TV shows and movies do a better job depicting legal issues with realism so as not to confuse the public?
Mm.
And we talked about that, like, some of these things, of course, we know it's entertainment, but people can get confused on certain things. And like just like we mentioned, the whole people in TV shows, the trope of them asking undercover people if they are police and expecting that they have to identify themselves. And a lot of people do believe that that's true. So, with that said, the poll results were 33% said yes, they should, 67% said no, they shouldn't. So, people were saying, someone was said people should just recognize the difference between fantasy and reality. And then someone countered back, they should, but too many people have only a tenuous grasp of the difference between the two.
Right. And I can see the perspective of art is art, right? Why should we be
Right.
trying to police art? If you want to make a show a certain way, who's to say it has to be realistic? And why are we going to say that the legal depictions in the show have to be realistic, but every other premise can be ridiculous? I mean, you have all kinds of characters and all kinds of storylines on these shows that are not real. It's fiction. It's a work of fiction. And so why do we say we want some of it to be true to life, but everything else could be a complete fabrication? I get that, right?
Yeah. Um, a couple of people weighed in. There's actually former police officers weighed in and said, wrote a whole diatribe here. And he's like, you touched a nerve with me. Um, but he was saying basically that in real police work probably wouldn't make for a good show because it's a lot of procedures and
Right.
paperwork. And so
Right.
it doesn't move the stories along very well.
The
And
same thing
so,
with legal work, not just police work, but I've said that also. You watch
Right,
a show like Law and Order, and to its credit, it does tend to get things more right than many other shows. But even
right,
in a show like that, it makes it seem like everything gets resolved so quickly and in front of the judge. This actually is probably the biggest misconception, and that's a result of how it's depicted on media, on TV, and in movies all the time. Uh,
right,
People in the real world tend to think that lawyers are making their cases exclusively an oral argument in front of the judge. You win and you lose
right,
with your speech in front of the judge, right? In reality, that accounts for maybe 10%, right? Probably 90% of it is the papers, but it wouldn't be entertaining to watch a lawyer sitting there writing a legal paper all day. I mean,
right.
the drama is the lawyer making that speech in front of the court, absolutely, right? But it does leave people with, it leaves people with false impressions.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. And then of course people were saying the general public should know the difference and spend some time educating themselves about what our justice system is really like. And then, know that it's just a show. And you would expect that, you would hope that, but again, some things can influence people, especially if it's constantly done over and over again. And like you said, people look at court cases and expect it's going to be all this dramatic grandstanding and whatnot. And if you watch court TV, it's usually someone standing there like, yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your
Right,
Honor.
right.
You know what I mean? It's like, that's not going
I,
to make for a very good show.
Absolutely. And I find that as a lawyer, when I'm arguing a case, I always think I'm more charismatic and dynamic of a speaker than the other lawyer because they're probably good at doing legal research and maybe legal writing, and their argument maybe looks better on paper. Although I tend to think I have the better argument usually, but their skill set may be that more so than public speaking or presenting orally, right? And so I'll be very happy with the way I present my argument, and the other lawyer will be very dry, like you said,
Right,
like yes, we are here because of this law.
right, right.
Like, oh my God, like, can you at least have some dynamic range and it might be interesting a little bit, but it wouldn't look good on TV. I don't know how much it really matters in the courtroom. I think it does matter a bit, right? I think you want to be a more interesting speaker in general, but at the end of the day, the law is the law, and the dramatics don't decide it as much as the arguments of the law.
Right, right. So, but yeah, so it's interesting. There is one point here that someone made, and I've had the same issue with, and I've always meant to write a blog or an article about it, but um, this guy said that he's more concerned with how criminal investigations are portrayed on TV shows with the police can do no wrong no matter how badly they violate a character's rights. And I've noticed that same thing, especially if you look probably starting in the 80s or 90s, where cops will purposefully break the law or violate people's rights to get the results they want while being portrayed as the good guys.
Mhm.
Like if you go back to um I don't know, the 60s or 70s, police characters would routinely help people out and be like the neighborhood friendly you know what I mean? And then there was this shift. And I think that gives a bad impression. And someone here pointed it out. Another person said like that also troubles them, saying like this whole expression "stop or I'll shoot"
Mm.
is like really is what is they saying? The only time this expression is not prelude to a crime by the officer is if the suspect is moving towards them. But with TV shows, it's like that's okay, if you're running away, we can just shoot you. Like, but really, lawfully, that's not the case.
Do you think
But
that influences
absolutely,
officers in real life, their information they see
absolutely,
on TV?
absolutely, I
Not
absolutely
just the
believe,
public, but actually the officers.
absolutely, I believe that. I
Right.
absolutely
Some might
believe
even
that.
become officers because they think it looks cool on TV. Like, I want to be that guy. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've seen, and if you go and you watch any show, and I can't remember what show it was, but I was watching one and thinking about the same thing, and just right in the show, like they had, there was a parked car and it was a suspect's car. They had no warrant or whatever, and these were the good guys. These were the good guys, and they busted the guy's window to get in because they wanted to see what was on the seat for their investigation. and it wasn't it was like a benign thing, and they just didn't care. It was just like, oh well, we had to do it. And they played it off like it was a joke. And it's like, no, you're the police. You just
Right.
violated these people's rights. You committed a crime, and
Yeah.
the
You'll
show's
see that on
portraying you as the good
shows.
guy.
Yeah, you'll see that kind of thing on shows, or well, they'll do something extra legally, right? Like you said, maybe
Yeah.
they'll do a search without a warrant, and then one of the other characters will be like, "Oh, we needed a warrant. Oh, don't worry, we'll call in for the judge. We'll figure it out in the back." And like, what I mean? Like they do things that they
Yeah.
know they're not supposed to do, but they almost make it seem cool that they're getting
Yeah.
around the law. Yeah,
Yeah. And and you'll see it like even if they have a suspect in custody, right? Cops will just if the suspect is saying something, the cop would just punch him or kick him or something like that, just for comedic effect, or just
yeah,
because they're having a bad day, or they feel like it, and they're never held accountable for it,
right.
you
Shout out to
know?
John Gamble and James in the chat checking in. So
Yeah.
this
So
is an interesting one, and actually, it is similar to the last discussion about where do you draw the line? If you do, is it a free for all? Should media, whether it's a TV show, a movie, or even a newspaper, be allowed to do what it wishes, and
right,
it's up to the public to discern what's real and what's not, and to sort that out? Or is there more responsibility on the media's end? I think it can be tricky, especially when lines start to get blurred, like on the
right,
Curb finale. Yes, it's a comedy. We shouldn't be taking it too seriously, but they
right.
used the real law. They talked about motions and jury selection, and they were presenting it in a way that made it seem somewhat realistic. Certainly, someone who doesn't know how the legal system works may watch that and think it's a learning exercise. Oh, okay, I didn't know that that's how trials worked. Now I know, right? People may
Right.
start thinking those things, even if it's completely
Absolutely.
wrong.
Absolutely. And they wouldn't necessarily be wrong to think that, because uh, a lot of these shows do tend to include realism to try to make their story more credible, more relatable.
Right,
And they
right,
even have consultants on set. They'll have legal consultants, law enforcement consultants, military consultants, depending on what kind of thing they're producing. Um, and so there are times where there's a mix of realism and
yeah,
not.
yeah.
So
Right. And again, watching the Curb finale and this whole season, right? The whole last season, we're talking about filing a motion to challenge the constitutionality and all these things that are real things you can do in a case, right? And so when you're bringing in all of these realistic elements, but then you obscure them by having a trial that is completely out of bounds, I do think that you have some issues there. Now, should they be allowed to do that? Should we ban them from doing that?
right.
I don't know if we should go that far, but maybe we should
Right.
speak out on it and say, hey, maybe you guys can be a little more responsible with your shows.
Yeah, and maybe there should be some public education in that regard. Some sort of campaigns or whatnot to let people know. I think another one that's really big
Yeah,
is the Miranda rights one.
right. Absolutely. Yep. Yep.
That's a major trope. Every TV show, you have to be read your rights when you're arrested.
Hmm.
And that's not necessarily the case.
Right. You do have to be read your rights, but it's much more narrow than it's presented on TV.
Right.
Right. People act like, well, if the cop doesn't say that, then you can never be prosecuted, or like you're
Right, right, right.
your life because you forgot to say you have the right to remain silent.
Yeah, so it's yeah. But again, it's for dramatic effect. It makes more interesting scenes. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's very interesting.
Right. Right. And we don't expect dramas or comedies to be documentaries, and we don't expect them to be
No.
true to life in every regard because we know it'll be a lot more boring if it was. Right. uh,
Right,
so yes, things will be dramatized and exaggerated and all kinds of stuff, and we have to accept that as well.
right. We
Maybe
expect
it is on,
documentaries to be documentaries,
right,
but
right. So maybe it is on us to just be like, hey, Larry David, what are you doing?
yeah, yeah. So,
All right, well, interesting discussion. Speaking of it being on us,
uh-oh,
a poll came out
uh-oh.
Well, and we have to consider the source here because this poll was done by the group pushing for this change, right? So keep that in mind. However, the results aren't entirely surprising either. They're saying that Unite NY polled 800 New Yorkers from across the state and found 80% of New Yorkers supported term limits for statewide elected officials. So,
Mm,
with support that great, it would seem to be incumbent on us, the people, to do what we can to enact that change. It's a very popular idea, certainly even
mm.
across ideological and partisan lines. However, the issue is the legislators, people who are in office, are the ones who would have to pass laws to change this. And they're less likely, I won't say they all are like this, but as a whole, they're less likely to be in favor of passing a law that's going to take them out of their job.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see that, like, because yeah, yeah, you've got to put this bill through that's going to get rid of your position. Wait, what?
Right. And so I guess that's to be expected to a certain degree, although you do see, I think, more now people running for office and making it part of their platform as they're campaigning, right? I think it might be
Mm,
a little bit different to ask someone who's already been in office to adopt that.
right,
But someone coming in who's running really to be a reformer, right? They're more likely to advocate for that message and hopefully stick to it. I mean, cynically, we can say maybe some will get into office and conveniently change their view. I'm sure that's going to happen too sometimes. But
oh, sure,
hopefully more people will stick to their guns on this one because it is something with a lot of support. Although I'll say it isn't as cut and dry, I think, as some people make it out to be, because you
right,
do want institutional support. You don't want too much of a turnover. And this may depend on what the terms are, right? Just because you have term limits doesn't mean you have to have someone new every 2 years come in either. It could be a term
right.
limit of maybe, I think one proposal here that we have before the legislature is 12 years for a legislator. I think that's
Mm,
pretty reasonable. 12 years. I think you can get enough done in 12 years as a state legislator. Some people I've spoken to have expressed concerns that, for example, in the New York City Council, we have a two-term limit. It's typically 8 years. The staff tends to have more sway, more power, more influence than the actual council members because the staff can be there for a longer time and the council members are kind of seen as disposable. And so they said that's an issue that the turn, in their view, the turnaround is too sudden in a body like that. But I think 12 years, even 16 years, I think there are compromises here that would make sense, right? Because it is something that people want to see. They don't want someone in the same office for 30 years. So can we find some reasonable position here that would prevent that?
well, theoretically, what would prevent that is the polls, people voting them out of office.
Right. And that's what people say also. We do have term limits. It's called an election every time, but that's not a term limit, right? And what we also see is incumbents having
Right,
a large advantage, right? For better or for worse. Many will say largely for worse, but part of it is natural. They're in office. They've probably, or at least I should say, hopefully, been doing the work, right, of the
right.
people. And so people are going to get to know them and like them and have the relationships. They're going to have the infrastructure and they're going to build up their thing. And so it's natural that if they're doing their job, people will keep voting for them. And even though people say that they support the idea of term limits, if you ask them if we should get rid of their particular legislator, they're less likely to say yes, right? You put it up for a vote, and usually, even if they support term limits, people don't usually say, I really like them. I really think they've done a great job in office, but I'm going to vote for their opponent this time because term limits. Unfortunately, people don't say that.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's what we probably run into. But I mean, if people voted for the effectiveness of their elected official, then we'd have kind of a term limits or limited terms
Yeah,
for people. Not term limits, we'd have
yeah,
limited terms because if someone's been in there 30 years and
yeah.
your conditions are still horrible, you're still upset at your, you know,
I think
politicians, then
right, Right.
You would think you would be voting them out,
And I
but
think you hit on something there. A lot of it comes down to voter turnout. And so, because turnout tends to be low, especially in these local races, the electorate that shows up is much more likely to be in favor of the elected officials because they're not
right,
the disenfranchised. The people who don't vote are usually the ones who are so fed up with the system that they're like, ah, oh, it doesn't make a difference. Who are these people? What have they ever done for me? Yes, it's a waste. I can vote for this one or that one, but nothing's ever going to change. They're not tuned
right.
into it, right? The people who are more tuned in are more likely to vote for their local officials because maybe they've been working with them. Maybe they have seen results from them. So maybe they're not so upset. They're not so angry, right? They're actually engaged with the system. They're part of the system. And so they tend to vote that way, to maintain the status quo, right? And so I think what you're talking about really is if we get more people to vote, if we increase the turnout, even in local elections, then we'll start to see some real changes.
Yeah. So,
One thing I wanted to mention though is, there's a lot of focus on legislators, senators, assembly members, but we really do need to talk about statewide officials like governor and lieutenant governor, right? Attorney general and controller, even, because there's no reason, in my opinion, that they should be allowed to be in there indefinitely. I mean, think about that. The governor of New York, in theory, can run as many times as she wants or as he wants. Other
mm,
states don't do that, right? Virginia is one state where you can only run for 4 years and you're out, only one term.
mm,
So could we at least mirror what happens at the federal level and say you could run for 2 terms, even be charitable and say 3 is the max, but that's pushing it. But I
right.
don't see why the governor of New York has to be in there for more than 8 or possibly 12 years.
Has that ever happened though, that someone's been there that long
Yes,
in New
absolutely. How long
York?
was Cuomo in there before he had to step down? If Cuomo wasn't forced out, he would still be in office.
Mm,
All right, what did he come in 2011, something like that?
mm.
So yeah, they go and they go and they go in New York until they until they're forced out. And it's sad. And you start seeing stats like, well, everyone is in office until they're either indicted, they die, or they resign in shame, right? Shouldn't be that way. We should be able to serve our terms honorably and be gone.
Mm.
So
Yeah, it's a big topic that a lot of people have been talking about. I wonder if we did institute term limits,
mhm.
would that really change things? And one of the things I think about, I think in some ways, not having term limits right now has been kind of a safeguard against moving even faster towards the extremes.
That's a good point. That's a good point because when you have an open race, then you remove the advantage of the incumbency. We tend to think of that as a bad thing, but like we
Right,
said, there are some good aspects of it as well. Someone who's established already may represent a more stable voice and keep you away from like someone new. And when you have that open seat, and it's kind of like anyone's game, it's a toss up, and then you maybe are more prone to those extreme forces.
because think about it now, a lot of the candidates that are popping up, especially on the right,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the newer candidates are the far right, these far right extremists, right? And if it was an open field, like every election, every other election, the majority of the candidates would be them. That would be the crop that
Right.
people would have to
And you know
choose
what?
from.
Right. What it is also, when you're in office, you have moderating forces on you, meaning you're trying to get things done in government. And so you're trying to compromise to get things passed. You're working with people of varied interests, people with all kinds of agendas, right? People of diverse backgrounds. You're trying to build coalitions to get things achieved. And so it does tend to moderate you in a certain way because you have to kind of take everyone's view into consideration and kind of keep them
Right,
all mixed. If you're just running as an outsider, an insurgent, someone who's never been in office before, I'm coming to shake things up, right? You're much more likely to take on extremist views because you have nothing weighing on you. You have no
right,
consideration that would make you want to moderate your views in any way, right?
right,
You're an ideologue at that point. And
right.
so I think that does certainly happen. That when you have new people coming in, you do tend to get people who are more extreme than the people who are in office and have been around power and know how it works, right? They know how the system
Right.
works. They know that,
Right.
yeah, things are often frustratingly slow, but to get things passed, sometimes you have to, do these dances. So then you
Right.
have people on the outside who are frustrated with that and say, I'm not here to do any dances. I'm here to set the whole place ablaze.
Right. And I think we there's a chance that we could see more people like that
That is
in
true.
a just a completely open field. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't. I'm just saying that that's something that we'd have to be wary of. And I think like for example, if you look at the current Republican Party compared to the Republican Party that was around during the beginning of George Bush's presidency, the second's
Mhm.
presidency, right? Where you had like the old guard,
Right.
right? The established politics. And towards the end is when the Tea Party started to pop up and they started slowly taking seats and it got more extreme. But you had some of those holdouts into the newer era, like the Paul Ryans and this and that. If they wouldn't have stepped down, there wouldn't have been that opening. They could have been kind of that buffer between the new and the old.
Right.
And in some ways, like I said, it's been kind of a safeguard in that regard. Um,
Same can
we'll
be said on
have,
the Democratic side as well, right? You may have people who have been in office for a while.
sure,
Some people might think that they're not as progressive enough for certain blocks or whatever, but they've been holding
right,
down that seat and they have that power of or the advantages of being there, having that network, delivering for the community, whatever it may be. They have that established base of support. If it's an open seat, then you may get in a primary someone with more extremist views coming in.
right. And I don't think a lot of people think about that when they talk about term limits, right? It's just more this idea that, okay, we don't need people to be in there for
Right.
decades after decades because they get entitled and they get this and that. And that's completely
Right.
true as well.
Right.
But we need to keep
And
the other
also,
thing.
I'll say this: people have a misconception. I'm seeing this on social media a lot nowadays. They tend to think that people get into office and become wealthy as a result of being in office. And I won't deny that sometimes it happens, especially at the national level. Someone becomes a
Right.
celebrity, they write books, they become a millionaire. Yeah, that does happen. Or someone gets very, very well known on the national stage and maybe gets paid lots of money to give speeches and things like that. Sure, it does happen. But there's this idea floating around out there that people get into office, and I think they're thinking they're stealing money somehow. It's like it's a conspiracy theory. You'll see this, like, oh, they came into office, they were always poor, middle class, and now they're a millionaire. And then they're like, yeah, that's what they do every year. It's like they think they're just like siphoning off money from the treasury or something like that to make themselves rich. And that's not really a thing. That's not what's going on.
Right. Yeah. So,
So,
so it's an interesting discussion. I guess that kind of is that nuance in the discussion,
right,
right? That,
right.
you know, even though, yeah, we can say term limits, but we got to also think about what comes after that
Yeah.
as a
And that's
result if we
also
do have.
why when we say term limits, we have to be prepared to have the discussion of how do
Right.
we define those term limits, right? Because term limits could be you could run for 2 years and be done, or it could be you could run for 20 years and be done. I mean, there's a lot of room there to work with.
Right.
And
So,
I just think as a starting point, governors of New York and probably all statewide officials shouldn't be able to be in office indefinitely. I think there should be some limit
yeah.
on it. Even if,
Yeah.
12 years, I think to me is more than enough for a governor, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Um,
Yeah.
but there are maybe certain seats where you want more leeway or maybe some more compromise in how you structure it because you don't want too much turnover either, right? You do want some stability in the government, right? And so maybe some seats should be subject to longer limits than others, or what I mean. You want to be able to counteract that somehow so that the negative side effects don't become too prevalent, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's something to think about. I think, and I think about something similar, not to go off topic, but I think about something similar when people talk about extending the Supreme Court to more justices. Um, it's people think about it, they say it because it sounds good, but what happens after that? You're
Right.
still going to have an uneven balance, and it can still be stacked one way or the other. It doesn't matter how many you have.
Yeah. Yeah.
For example, when Trump was in office, if he put in, you know, five instead of three, like it could still stack it one way or the other, and it's the same thing. Pretty similar in that regard.
Yeah. Or they can keep adding to the number. Right.
Right. Yeah. So I think we have to think about what comes next instead of just what is the buzzword or the popular idea right at the in the front on the face of it.
Well, that almost sounds like the bottom line, Jay.
I'm okay with that.
Think about what comes next. Good advice,
Yeah.
generally speaking, in life, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things we want changes. We want things to happen, especially if we're unhappy with what's going on. And we may think about, okay, well, this needs to happen, and it becomes a popular rallying cry. But we got to think about also what comes next once that's achieved, or if that's achieved. How do we navigate the new waters that's going around?
Hmm.
You know, um, there are reasons certain things become standards prior. At one point, that was probably the new idea. And so we got to figure out how we navigate afterwards. And, things constantly evolve and change. And maybe you try something new and it doesn't work as well as we thought. We need to adjust that. And that's fine as well. But just having that idea, having that conversation, understanding those nuances as well is pretty important, I think.
Yes. Well, that's why the show is called Nuance, and that's why you can find us wherever podcasts are available. Of course, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, we are just about everywhere. Facebook Live every Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. So find us, get involved in the discussions, let us know your thoughts, and we appreciate you checking us out each and every week. As always, we've got work to do. We'll catch you next time. Thanks, guys.